I want to give you a little context for where we are and the challenges that we face. First of all, everybody will recognize this situation. That's the state of California taking your money. $2.05 billion the last go-around, $1.7 billion of which was paid on May 10th, $350 million which will be paid next May 10th, barring some other decision by the Court of Appeal. My understanding is that for most agencies in the state, the loss of that money meant that basically you had to shut down. You might have proceeded with projects that were already underway, but new commitments are few and far between, and everybody is in kind of a state of uncertainty now, wondering, well, what's next? Will we have this happen to us again? And what we want to talk about today is how do we work to prevent it from happening again. Now, when that action was taken by the state, your board of directors decided to meet in a series of meetings to ask ourselves some very hard questions about whether or not we as an organization and all of you as agencies and as the redevelopment industry in California were doing all that we could to protect these funds and to stop the state from taking more money. And also, of course, as we were considering what we should do, and in the meantime, we have these things happen to us, which I talked about earlier. Bell Hell, as I refer to it, the LA Times articles, and by the way, that's a series, so we can expect probably more in the series to come out. And as I also talked about earlier, the Senate Office of Oversight and Outcomes report, which pointed out a lot of problems with the administrative part of the low and moderate income housing fund. You know, the easiest thing for all of us to do after the state took that money is to just kind of sit around and blame somebody. You know, obviously we could blame the governor, we could blame the legislature, we could blame specific members of the legislature for taking our funds. I suppose we could also blame Judge Lloyd Connolly because while he found in favor of our lawsuit on the first lawsuit, he ruled against us on the second one. And we could blame others probably, but the problem with the blame game is that we could end up sort of blaming ourselves to our ultimate extinction. And so that's not going to be a good strategy. We had to figure out some other approach, some other strategy for how it is that we can protect our money. One of the things that the board decided on very early on is that business as usual was not going to get it. To somehow just think, well, hey, why don't we just wait this out? Why don't we just see if this all doesn't blow over? Let's just see if it passes. And that's not a good strategy either. So we need to pursue some sort of positive and constructive course, and that's what we have ultimately put forth in that strategic plan for redevelopment. I hope that everybody in this room has read and studied that strategic plan. If you haven't, we have provided conveniently another copy of it in your packets for this conference. It should be one of the first items on the right-hand side in your folder. Let me underscore that it is the most important thing you can read about the politics of protecting redevelopment funds. I just can't underscore enough how important it is for all of us to understand that strategy and to buy in to what it is that it proposes to do. This is not one of those plans where it can be implemented by your relatively small staff in Sacramento. It relies on your participation, your active engagement in terms of making that strategy come to pass. But a little more background. First of all, when we were putting together the plan, we had to take stock of our strengths and our weaknesses. It's the same sort of thing that you would do if you were putting together a strategy. So what are the strengths that we bring to this whole equation in terms of protecting redevelopment funds? Well, first of all, redevelopment is a huge driver in the California economy. In a typical year, and this is not a typical year, and last year wasn't either, but in a typical year, your investments in communities adds about $40 billion to the California economy. $40 billion. Simultaneously, you're supporting over 300,000 jobs when we add them all up and down the state from all the projects that are going on at any one time. No small amount of money either for the economy or in terms of what it means to employment in California, and at a time when every politician wants to take credit for putting people back to work, our politicians in Sacramento took away money from a great economic driver and a great producer of jobs for people in California, particularly in the construction industry. Shouldn't have to tell you all about this one. We are the largest funders of affordable housing in California next to the federal government. But let me ask you this. How many people know that? How many people would even guess that we are the largest funders of affordable housing? It's like one of those great, closely held secrets in California in terms of our impact that we have on housing and housing production in this state. How many of your own legislators know that your investments in affordable housing are the largest next to the federal government? We do a great job in housing. It is truly one of the great assets of redevelopment. It's one of the things that others recognize as being important to building good local communities. There's something else we do. We build a lot of infrastructure. And the fact is that California, this golden state of ours, is wearing out. But you make investments that build roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, street lights, water lines, sewer lines, and increasingly drainage systems as well. We also build community facilities, community centers, senior centers, a lot of fire stations, I've found out, so a few police stations. All kinds of community facilities are also built with redevelopment funds. We're big builders of infrastructure. You know, infrastructure is that, or those things that people don't know about until they're not there. Okay, you never realize anything about infrastructure until it's missing or until something is wrong with infrastructure. Redevelopment builds a lot of infrastructure. Well, on the other hand, those are strengths. There are others, but what are our weaknesses? Well, there must be some weaknesses. Otherwise, our legislators and our governor wouldn't feel like they could just take $2 billion with impunity. So what are our weaknesses? Well, actually, they're pretty simple to understand. They're pretty simple to understand. I'm sure you all recognize this character. The fact of the matter is that nobody cares about redevelopment except you. Okay, you ever think about that? We don't have any constituents. If you think about all the other causes that are competing for funding in the state, there are constituents. Talk about school funding. Well, there are kids and there are parents. Talk about health care funding. Well, there are people who are sick. There are doctors and nurses. There are constituents for practically everything that you can think of except redevelopment. You're the constituents, but you're a pretty small group compared to, you know, these other competing interests in California. As a result of not having any real constituents, we lack political clout. That's our weakness. It's really summed up pretty simply. So, what are we going to do about that? Well, that's a pretty simple answer too. We've got to become better advocates. And as I talked about in the regional briefings that I just did, and maybe some of you attended, when I talk to a group of professionals about being advocates, they all get real squirmy in their seats. And they think, gee, that's not something I know how to do. That's not what I was trained to do. That's not what I went to school for. And what we want to try to do here today is talk you through how it is that you can become advocates and to really get you to understand that it's maybe not as hard and difficult as you might think. So we've got to become better advocates for redevelopment. But let me move to kind of a summary position here, because you shouldn't think that our lawsuits against the state or even Proposition 22, if it passes, will be enough. We're in a battle. We're in a battle for short supply of dollars in this state against a state that's dysfunctional and has an ongoing structural deficit that shows no promise of being solved. In that context, we've got to broaden the base of support for redevelopment. We have to have more people standing with us when it comes time for the state legislature to make decisions and choices about where they're going to get dollars. If they understand there's a broad constituency for redevelopment, if they understand those facts that I just went over, they're going to be a lot more hesitant to take your dollars the next time around. So what we're advocating is probably the strongest point in that strategy that you have there on your desk is that, we've got to do something to build coalitions of interest for redevelopment. We've got to bring together people who will be on our team. Some of you may have gone to the CRA annual conference that was in Pasadena earlier this year, and one of our speakers was former Senator Jim Brulte. And in his comments, he made this quote to us. He said, "Look, folks, politics is a team sport. Right now, redevelopment stands alone. And until you become part of a much larger team, you will get run over." Now, he's a pretty savvy guy. And I think you can take to the bank what he tells you about the reality of politics in California. We've got to be part of a bigger team, and we can do that through coalition building. But you're going to say, well, who should be on our team? Well, here's some examples. While I said a while ago that we don't have any constituents, well, that's actually not true. We have a lot of constituents, they just don't know it. And we haven't enlisted them to the cause, because when you think about it, there are many, many beneficiaries of redevelopment. Those are the groups, those are the individuals that we want to put together on our team, our coalition, in each jurisdiction throughout the state of California, coalitions that will relate to state legislators where you live, not just in Sacramento where I work. So the coalition building part of our plan is essential, and here are some examples of groups that you want to enlist to the cause.